What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of the CrazyFaceUno Podcast. I'm your host, Shane McNeely, and as always, we've got the good old Chansey Poo, and we've got a little Molly girl. They're the dogs of the podcast that will be in the background, and my guest today is the one, the only, my mother, Diane Engel. Mama, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Shane.
How you doing today?
Doing just great since you're home.
I know, it's been good. We've been able to hang out and spend some time together. And I've been trying to not be sleepy and fall asleep every 2 seconds.
That's okay.
I like to give a little spiel here, and I didn't do it there, but CrazyFaceUno was designed to inspire others to do good, to make a difference in our local and global communities. So if you're out there and you're listening, check out our website, crazyfaceuno.com, and you can find our podcast. You're obviously listening on something, but you can find it all over the place. Check it out. Spread the word. And thank you for listening. I had Grandma on yesterday. Since I've been home, I was able to get Granny on here, Della Paul. So if you're listening now, some of the things I'm sure we'll talk about, you'll have a little reference to if you listened to the one before. But it's really fun to have people on, and especially like it's going to be fun to just hear stories that you've got about life and me, and I'm sure who knows what else might come out. But Molly's made herself comfortable on Mom's lap, and she's got her head just resting on the table here. But yeah, I've been sticking with, and I know you know this, but I'm going to go ahead and tell it for everybody, but I've been sticking with just like the life story of the individual in some ways. And so speaking of having Grandma on here, and you grew up in the home she still lives in Gilead, Indiana. So what city were you born in? Were you born in Peru, or was it?
I was born in Peru, Indiana.
Okay. So you were born in Peru. You grew up in Gilead.
Yes. Lived there my whole life until I married your dad.
And then you guys moved to Akron, right? Was that the first area that you lived?
We lived first in a little house outside of Gilead, just like maybe a mile or 2 miles outside of Gilead, in the country.
Yeah. And then you moved over to
Then we moved to Akron.
Okay. See, it's things like this. I knew you didn't live in Akron the entire time, but I don't know. So these are always like fun things to, you don't sit down and be like, Mom, where did you live your entire life, you know? Well, let's just start from the beginning, because we talked with Grandma and she talked about some stories with you and Steven and growing up as there's 10 years between you and Steven, your brother, and my uncle. And it's just interesting or fun to talk about and kind of think back on some of those, because I've heard these stories, several of these stories, but they're fun stories. So growing up, it was you and Grandma, and Grandpa obviously too, but I know that you and Grandma were had the relationship and were close. And what are some of your first memories with Grandma, or first memories growing up?
Oh, Mom and I were always close. I mean, she's probably my best friend, to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, we were just inseparable. We did everything together. And another person that was very, very close to me, and I was very close to her, was my mom's mom, who was Anna Lou.
Anna Lou, yeah. And we talked about her a little bit. And it's funny because she was telling me that Anna Lou, the Lou, and I know I told you that Dana's grandma, my wife, her grandpa was Louis. And so there's this connection between her and I with Louis and Louise, and now Lou is a new version of that I've not really been as familiar with, but it makes it even sweeter because we've talked about whatever, regardless of gal or, girl or boy, if we have kids someday, or when we have kids someday, we always wanted to name the middle name like Louis or Louise or, something
That's
along
really
those
sweet.
lines, just to like remember our grandparents, so that's just a fun one. And this will come out a little bit more, and we talked about it yesterday too, but as far as like you having cancer and when you got a little bit older, but Anna, she passed away from cancer as well.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, and she had cancer the same time I had cancer.
Okay.
So that was another bond that bonded us.
Yeah, a little bit later on in life.
Yeah, as I was older. So I don't know. My grandma and I were just really, really close.
Yeah.
Which I think is interesting because you are so close to my mom.
Yeah.
And but grandparents are just special people in grandkids' lives.
I know. What do you think that is?
I don't know. I don't really know why there's such a tie there, but at least in our family, that's how that is.
Well, I think most of the time, I mean, obviously there's exceptions to every rule, and not every family is the same as ours or same, but I think oftentimes like that's the case. So, you get excited about going to see grandma and grandpa, or maybe it's the spoiledness, you
It
get
could
spoiled.
be, yeah. It
I don't
could
know.
be. I don't know. I think some of it was because we live close.
Yeah.
And I could just, they just lived up the hill. And that's how I always referred to it. And I would say to my mom many times, I'm going to go see grandma. And she was always fine with that because grandma was just up the hill.
Right.
And so...
well, and for you guys listening, if you listen to Della Paul, my grandma, the previous episode, then you're kind of familiar with Gilead. But Gilead is this tiny little store, and as I was talking with Grandma, she said she thought maybe at one point in time there was 50 people that kind of lived in Gilead, but I vaguely remember like a 33 or something at one time when I was younger.
That's what I remember too.
So I would say the average is probably like around that 35, mark or whatever.
Yeah.
And so it's a really small town in Indiana. Right. If you look it up in the map, it's just a little blip. A little blip on your radar.
I used to always tell people if you blink your eye as you're going through it, you'll miss it.
Absolutely. But it's quaint, it's cute, and it's like feels like home, And I know I've told you this, but that house, and been talks of selling or whatever that house and getting rid of it. Just my grandparents, as you maybe heard yesterday, she's almost 80 years old, and so it's just a lot. It's a lot of house, a lot of yard, a lot of just everything. But what makes it hard is she's lived there her entire life pretty much as well, and trust me, I get that. I've lived in the house that I just moved from for 6.5 years, and it's really hard to like just say goodbye to those things when you call it home. But we've lived in different places, we lived in different homes, and the steadfast, like the things that have always been in my life have been my grandparents' houses, and that's, Dad's side, Edith and Doug there, and then they've passed away, Grandma passed away a few years ago, and so, that house is still in our family for the moment, but, know that that's not always going to be the case. And the same with Grandma's house. There's something about those two places that's home for me, because I don't have that, like really that one place. I've lived in the house in Minnesota. I've lived there as long as I've lived anywhere. That's 6.5 years. And so, for me, even like talking about it, it's like nostalgia, it like hits me. I have thoughts and memories in that place. I know that it's funny because I feel like I know it like the back of my hand too, like the yard, and I can just picture everything in my head. And I've got these deep-seated memories from as long as I've been alive, but go on. Gilead is, you would go up the hill, and so when you're at my grandma's house and you come out the front door, and was your former house, you take a little right, and it's maybe 1/10 of a mile. It's like barely anything. And you go down this little hill, and then you go back up this like nice little steep little hill, and it's like a 2-story like stairs. You know, if you were going to go up 2 flights of stairs,
Right.
like, it's kind of like that in some ways.
Is. It is.
And it's just it's a little steep little hill, and at the top of that hill, was it the one right at the top of the hill, or was it like one right past it? Right, it wasn't.
It was like 2 houses past.
So there was like a house when you got to the top, and hers was the next one.
Right.
It's like an empty lot next to her. Like the 2 houses kind of had their backyard and her side yard were like together, so it made it feel like a bigger lot. And I've actually never been in that house.
Oh, that house is gorgeous now.
Yeah.
It was really pretty too, and Grandma owned it, but it is even nicer now. The people that own it, that bought it from Grandma and Grandpa, they had a fire in that house, and
I vaguely remember that.
yeah, they did. They had a fire, and it didn't destroy it completely, but it did some damage, and so they replaced the original woodwork, which the original woodwork was very detailed, and she opened up. Grandma and Grandpa have a 2-story home, and so she opened up the staircase.
Oh wow!
And she put a matching staircase in to match the original woodwork in the house, and it is beautiful. I mean, she allowed me to come in and see it. She said, "Diane, would you like to come in and see your grandparents' home?"
Yeah.
She said, "Now that I've redone it." And I said, "Grandma would be thrilled at what you have done to this."
Yeah.
And it just really touched my heart because I knew Grandma would be tickled.
Sure.
And it is really pretty what she's done to it. And plus she is a gardener, so she has flowers everywhere, and Grandma loved flowers, and so she's really done a lot to the place, and it really looks nice. I'm just tickled with how it is now. It's really neat.
Yeah. So you were telling us just a little bit about how Grandma Anna, or Great Grandma Anna, right? For me,
for you,
how Great Grandma Anna. And you were close, and you'd walk up the hill. And what are some of your memory? Like, what do you remember doing with her that's like so memorable?
We did a lot of baking together. She had an apple tree out back that the apples were wonderful to bake with, and we baked a lot of apple pies. We made a lot of applesauce together. We sang. One thing we would do on Sunday afternoons. My mom and I would go up there and visit, and we would sing a lot of gospel songs together. And
did you just have them memorized, or did you have like a hymnal, or like
we would go to my mom and I would go to Christian bookstores, and we would buy these song books, and we would just sing. We would go up there and sing because
a cappella, just no music,
just sing. And Grandma and I would carry the melody, and my mom was an alto, so Mom would always sing the alto part. Yeah. And I just loved doing that. That was just one of the fun things I remember doing on Sunday afternoons with Grandma. And that's 2 things I did a lot with her. Grandma, she was loved to eat like the rest of us, and I can remember going up on Saturdays, and she'd love to cook hamburgers. We always had hamburgers for lunch. And she'd say, "Diane, you want a hamburger?" And so she'd send Grandpa to this other little town called Denver, Indiana.
Another little burg. A little tiny thing.
And they had a grocery store there that would grind fresh meat. And she would have Grandpa get fresh hamburger that was freshly ground, and he would come back with this fresh hamburger, and she would make hamburger patties, and she had this skillet that I don't know what there was about this pan, but she would cook them in that pan, and there was no hamburger that tasted like.
Would she season them anyway? Do you remember?
Yeah, there was a certain seasoning she used, and I can't remember the seasoning, but it just made those hamburgers.
Yeah. So this was a question. Grandma was pretty humble about her cooking abilities, and I'm just a cook, she said.
But well, we all know that's not true, but
yeah, she is legitimately, and I'm not the only one. Dad says the same thing still. She's the best cook he's ever had.
She's a good cook.
And Yeah, do you think, obviously that had a pretty big influence on Grandma, but is that where Grandma learned to cook, is from Anna?
Sure. And Mom, my grandmother was a good baker. Okay. She was really good at baking. She could make an apple pie that was, and she put it there again. There was a certain skillet pan and I wish so bad I would have got that pan. I know that sounds crazy, but there was just certain things, that she would make and she would put it in this pan. It wasn't a pie plate. It wasn't like your normal pretty little pie that you would see, that someone would make. It was in this certain type of and it was a pan. But oh my gosh, it just would melt in your mouth. The pie, it was so good. Yeah. But yes, I would say my mom picked up a lot of Grandma's.
Yeah. Well, obviously that affected you if you were around that a lot. You were around both of those two, which adds to why you're such an amazing cook as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
I always love coming home because I always know I'm going to have the most delicious food ever. You. You always have good food. One of the things you had mentioned, you had told both of us, you told Grandma and I a story about this brooch, right? Yeah. That you loved of Grandma's. Now we're just telling on you, but I'm putting you on the spot to tell the story. But
that's okay.
I think it's obviously it's an important time in your life or something that you remember quite well. So you want to tell us the story about the brooch and how that all came about?
Grandma Dameron, and that's my mom's mom, my grandma, she had a jewelry box that she had on her dresser, and I would go up there Saturday mornings a lot, and there again, we were together a lot on Sunday afternoons because she would live close, and I was just there a lot. And one Saturday I was up there and I was helping her make her bed, and she was putting away some of her jewelry, and I saw this brooch that she had in her jewelry box, and I loved the color pink, and I wasn't very old. I may have been 7, 6, somewhere around in there. I wasn't very old, but at that time, Grandma Stanley, which would be my great-grandmother, which would be my mom's grandmother, she was living with them. Because, and she was German. She was, I believe, half German. Yeah. And
which we have a lot of German in our family, right?
Yes.
Paul is very much German. Mm-hmm. Grandma's got the Paul, the Dameron, the Stanley, all that. She's very German. Mm-hmm. And then even on Dad's side, there's some German, I think, that runs through that side as well. So I've got a lot of German as well.
So anyway, she had let me go through her jewelry box, which I love jewelry and still do to this day. But anyway, and there was this brooch that was in her box that I said, "Oh, Grandma, I just love this." And she told me, she said, "Someday, Diane, that will be yours." Yeah. And I loved it. It was pink. And it was, the stones in it were just gorgeous. I can still visualize it today. Mm-hmm. And that was all that was said. And, we were putting her jewelry away, and I put it away in the box, and I didn't think too much more about it. Well, probably a couple months had passed, and I was up there for some reason. It was a Sunday afternoon, and I was in her bedroom, and that brooch was laying out, and I picked it up and I put it in my pocketbook. I had this little pocketbook that was black, and it was old.
What did the brooch look like?
The brooch had I want to say sequin like stones in it. Yeah. Or crystal-like stones. And it also had some smooth, milky pink-looking like stones in it. It was just gorgeous in my eyes.
Quartz type looking?
Yeah, okay. and it was quartz. Good sized. It was good sized brooch pin. Yeah. But anyway, and I just picked it up and put it in my purse because to me, Grandma said that someday I would get that. That would be mine. So I just thought, I'm going to take this home. because I was afraid that I wouldn't get that brooch. In my mind, as a little girl, that was what I thought. She told me someday it was going to be mine, so to me, that was someday. Yeah. And so I took it home. I mean, I had been up. I mean, I had even went out in the kitchen and talked with Grandma and you know, I don't know, it was even evening before I went home. But I went home that evening and I took the brooch out of my pocketbook and I showed it to Mom and I said, look what I have. And Mom said, where did you get that? And I said, I got it from Grandma. And Mom said, no, where did you get that? And I said, I got it at Grandma's. And she said, did she give it to you? And I said, well, she told me someday it would be mine, and I got it. And she said, I asked you, did she give it to you? And I said, no, she didn't give it to me. I just got it from Grandma.
Yeah.
And so she knew that I was lying and that I had taken the brooch.
Yeah.
And she said, you are going to walk right back up there and you're going to tell her that you took that brooch.
Yeah.
And I fell to pieces. I was crying and I was just a mess. And she said, come on, you're walking right up that hill and you're going to tell Grandma what you did.
Yeah.
So I walked up that hill and I felt terrible. I mean, my heart was broken. And I went up there and I walked in the house. Well, Grandma Stanley was sitting in her rocking chair. And Grandma Stanley, I was really afraid of her. She was a very German woman. It's the only way I know to put it. She wasn't kind with me, and I don't know, not like Anna, not like Grandma Anna.
Which sounds like it was just kind of her personality.
Yes, it was. And I think it was because she was older and she was toward the end of her life, and I just think that's how it was. And so she had bony fingers. I can still see her bony fingers, and she had an index finger. Well, I was crying already.
Yeah.
But she took that index finger and she pointed it at me, and it was crooked. And it was very bony. I can still see it to this day.
Probably a little arthritis in there, probably.
Oh, yeah. And she said, be sure your sin will find you out. And I fell completely apart again. And Grandma Dameron, which was Anna, she came out of the kitchen. And she said, what is wrong? And she had the kindest, sweetest voice. I will never forget it. And she said, what is wrong? And Mom says to me, you tell her what you did. And I said, Grandma, I took this. And she said, it's okay. It's okay. I told you you could have it. Someday I told you you could have it. And Mom said, no, Mother, she took it from you and she is to give it back. And I think that broke my grandma's heart as much as it broke mine. And Grandma did take it back because she knew my mom was trying to teach me a lesson.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think it was hard for Grandma to do that.
Yeah.
But she did take it.
Yeah.
And so anyway, but Grandma Stanley scared me to death. And I was never, and that's my vision of Grandma Stanley. Yeah. So anyway. But
something else I find really interesting about like your childhood or growing up is your relationship with your neighbors as well.
Oh, yeah.
And so you had the Swihart boys that were across the street.
Yes.
And you guys were all super close and
we
good
were.
Friends. And
yes, we were.
you know, I know that one of those boys has also contributed to my life, and I wouldn't be where I am today. Mm-hmm. I'm crying already.
It's okay. It's okay.
You know, without, you know, some of those people that I just find it so beautiful. Like sometimes the story of just how I got to where I am I don't know why I'm crying.
It's okay. It's all right.
But it's just, they're so intertwined with life, you know? Life gets so intertwined with, it's the little things. I mean, grandma and grandpa getting together too. I mean, those are obvious, right? But to living in that house and hearing grandma tell that story about, you know, Paul's going off, he got drafted, and he buys her a house. And because he bought that house for grandma to live in while he was gone, like, now you had the opportunity to grow up across the street from the Swihart boys, and I had the opportunity to find wrestling and, you know, do all these different things and whatever. But that's a story from a different day maybe, but I just find that really beautiful. And I wouldn't be, you know, I wouldn't have found my wife, I wouldn't have moved to Indiana or moved to Minnesota, and we wouldn't be here today having this conversation if it wasn't for some of those things. So those things, I think it's just amazing and beautiful, and I know that so many people's stories are like that. I think there's just beauty in that. But anyway, you've got some fun stories, I know, with like you and those boys, and you and Steven and those boys, and the horses, and what are some of your memories, or, you know, maybe explain some of that to us, just kind
of. Yeah, the Swihart boys. There were, let's see, there was Stuart, Rick, Kelby, and Brett. And Brett, I think, is the one you're referring to. Those boys hold a very special place in my heart as well. Stuart especially. And, well, I can't really say that. Stuart, yeah. And the reason for that, because I was bullied in school.
Yeah.
When I got to high school, well, let me explain. I went to North Miami High School, and our high school and junior high was together because it was a small, consolidated school district.
What was your graduating class? Do you remember? Size.
The size of my graduating class was one of the biggest ones, and it was, I believe we had, I want to say 119.
Okay.
And that was big for that consolidated school district. But anyway, when I got into the actual high school, our junior high and high school were together. The junior high was on one side of the school and the high school was on the other side of the school. But when I finally reached to the freshman hall, there was these girls that were, I think they were juniors and seniors at that point. But they bullied me. And I mean, to the point of, well, one day they held me in the bathroom. And to this day, I do not know what I did to those girls to cause this. There was 3 of them. And Stuart found out about it. Now, he was a senior at that point in his high school career, or however you want to say that. But he found out that this was going on, and he came that night. He came over to the house, over to my home, and he said, "Diane, why didn't you tell me this was going on?" And I didn't know what to say, because I didn't think anybody would care, and I didn't want to go to anyone. As a person that is being bullied, you don't want to tell anyone because you're afraid it's going to make it worse on yourself.
Yep, I understand.
I know you do. So, and I can remember saying to him, I just want it to go away. I don't want to cause any more problems. And he said, "Well, what has happened? What did you do something?" I said, "I don't know. Not that I am aware of. So anyway, he said, "I'm going to take care of this." And I said, "You don't understand." I said, "What happens when you graduate and I don't have you there anymore?" I said, who knows what they're liable to do to me? "Oh, no, they won't. Oh, no, they won't," he kept saying. And, but I just feel like I owe Stuart my life, because he took care of the problem.
Yeah.
And those girls never bothered me again.
Yeah.
And I really don't know to this day what he said to them or what he did. I know there was he had some other boys involved. I do know that. And I do know that it was after school hours that he took care of this problem.
Yeah.
But I really don't know what happened, but the bullying stopped. And I mean, there was a lot more to that story I could go into, but it was to the point where I was even afraid to go to school activities and all of that kind of thing. But he took care of the situation, and I feel very indebted to him. Rick was the one that was in my class. Rick and I just loved Rick. He was like, well, they were all like my brothers, but Rick was one that struggled in school, and he would come over to my house and want me to help him with papers. And
was Stuart older then?
Yeah, Stuart was
Stuart,
senior.
Rick, okay.
Yeah,
because as we've mentioned, I know Steven came along, and I don't know how they fit into that age range, but Steven came into your life 10 years later. So
I don't know. See, I don't know where Stephen fits in that either, because I'm trying to figure out. It would have been probably between Kelby and Brett.
Okay.
Or maybe, yeah.
So Stephen had one of those Swihart boys who was around his age too then at some point in time.
Yeah.
So they were in similar situation, I guess, in the sibling department.
Lineup.
Yeah. Department.
Yeah, right. But anyway, there was Rick, and Rick was always one that needed help with schoolwork, and I always was there to help him. And then Kelby was, I loved Kelby too. He was a sweetheart, but he was younger than me. And then there was Brett, and Brett was so good in so many areas. Yeah. And it was just amazing. I mean, but he was the youngest, so he came after me. But and then I introduced you to Brett because
of wrestling, and I was able to go and work out on holidays when I'd come home for Thanksgiving and Christmas or whatever, and go. He was a wrestling coach, assistant wrestling coach at one of the local high schools, and so I had to stay on weight and stay in shape, and so I'd go in, and he was around my weight class at least, and he's still as an adult, and so he would work out with me and keep me in shape and help me out.
And he always talked to me about you. He said, Shane's got so much potential. He would always say he has so much potential, Diane. He said he really needs to find someone to help him develop that. He said, I wish he lived around here. He said I'd work with him. Yeah.
Yeah, it was always fun to go, and it's always good to have. I just remember having like just different perspective and like forcing you to think about the way you're doing things differently or whatever, and just the questions that would get asked. And one of the other questions I had was, were you close to any of Grandma's siblings? I feel like I don't hear many stories about them all together. Like I don't remember hearing too many stories. I mean, there are some. I know. Obviously, you helped take care of Mike. Mike is Down syndrome, and how old is he now?
He's my age.
So he's in his 50s.
Michael and I are the same age.
Yeah, and you helped take care of him growing up.
Yes, I did. When Grandma worked at General Tire, and Grandpa worked at General Tire. And there was a time, Grandpa worked nights and Grandma worked days. So there would be a time lapse there when Grandpa would go to work and before Grandpa would come home and Grandma would go to work. Okay. So I would fill that gap, and I would go up and get Mike ready for school. Gotcha. And Grandma paid me. So it worked out great. Yeah. I had this little dab of money coming in. Right. And I would get Mike ready for school. Yeah. And Mike was he's been a peach in my life as long as I can remember. And then in the summertime, I would stay. I would go up there and stay, too. Now, Grandpa was there, but he was sleeping. Yeah. So I stayed and kept Mike company and basically watched him,
Yeah.
took care of him.
You're like a
fed
caregiver.
him, fed him lunch, whatever. So Mike and I have a history that goes way, way, way back. And, I've got a lot of stories. Kathy was my favorite.
Yeah.
Kathy was.
Yeah.
She always has been.
And which makes sense because out of all the siblings, like Kathy and Mike and Kathy's son, Chris, are the ones that I'm the closest with or know. So close sometimes that I forget that it's grandma's sister and brother. Like, I just don't even think about that. It feels different than that. And there's the age difference, obviously. But, I just sometimes I forget that that's the relationship to them. And obviously, time goes by and you lose connection with some people and whatever and don't stay close. But, that's some of the other siblings of grandma's. I'm not as familiar, don't have as much of a relationship. Like, I know the names, obviously, but, so there's that. Okay, cool. Do you have any stories, like, with Mike or growing up or Kathy or...
Yeah, Mike, one of my favorites is he loves to eat. And he would get off the bus. Now, this was one day that I had to stay after school, and I used to ride the bus home with him. And I would get off the bus, and, a lot of times I'd get off the bus there with him, and I would walk home, because there again, it was just down the hill or up the hill, whichever way you wanted to look at it. But that...
Uphill both ways.
Yeah, exactly. So that day, I had to stay after school for some reason, and he got off the bus by himself. Well, Grandma or Grandpa, either one, were home there. So he got off the bus and went in the house by himself. And when he got off the bus, he was always hungry.
Yeah.
Like you are, like every kid when they get home from school. So... as much as we could tell, this is what we could figure out anyway from what we saw. When Grandma got home, she was like maybe 10 minutes later than Michael. Yeah. When she got home, she was met in the backyard by a jar of peanut butter that had been thrown off the step and busted because he couldn't get the lid off, is what we think happened.
Yeah.
So that is a funny story to me. Another funny story, Mike, because he was Down syndrome, he was gaining weight rather fast as he was growing up. So Mom and my grandma was trying to keep Mike from gaining weight. And so they had discussed maybe not giving him bread at supper time. And so that night at supper, Mike was sitting there at the table, and they had filled his plate like they always did. And Mike was famous for eating bread with his meal. That was just what he did. And so they didn't butter him a slice of bread that night. And he was sitting there eating, and he said, "Bread, please." Nobody even acknowledged that he said it. And so he said it again, "Bread, please." No one acknowledged it. And I heard this going on because I was there too. And I thought, why isn't anybody getting him bread? I didn't know what they were doing. And Mike said it again, "Bread," and only this time is a little bit louder. "Bread, please." Well, nobody jumped to get it. And he says, "Oh, shit," and pushed himself back from the table and said, "I'll get it myself." And, of course, everybody just roared. I mean, the whole table just busted laughing. But Mike was mad. He didn't find any humor in that whatsoever. Because he didn't get why he wasn't getting bread. He'd always been able to have it before.
Right.
So that was a really funny story. I mean...
I liked hearing what's the story with him? Because he would say the prayer sometime, right?
Uh-huh.
What was that story he'd go through?
Everybody and his brother. And that depended on how hungry he was. Yeah. If he wasn't very hungry, his prayer
would be super long.
He would bless everybody. I mean, even people in Florida, because there was times that Grandma and Grandpa would go to Florida. And I mean, if he if he was hungry, then it would be short and sweet and to the point. But if he wasn't hungry, oh my gosh, you didn't know it might be an hour from now before you'd get to eat, because he would just go down the gamut of everybody he knew.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was Mike. Yeah. And to this day, he likes to pray.
Yeah.
Over his meal or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Did so I know that the Jake, who would be your grandfather, right? Would be Anna's husband. Grandma was talking about how he was just shy of 100 years old when he passed away. Do you have any memories of him kind of growing up? Or I remember he was funny. He had his little quirky things, but he had a million stories to tell as well. He was always a storyteller. You'd be over there, and he's somebody that I wish. Well, if I had this podcast, that'd be awesome. He'd be he would have been awesome. You'd have a month of content to talk about with him, because he just has had stories after stories after stories that he'd tell you, and they're always. It was like history. You'd like get a history lesson, because you'd hear about the times, and he was so good at like going into the details and talking about each and every one of those things. And and I'm sure as he got older, things changed. I know, but I just didn't know if you had any like memories of Jake or.
The main thing I remember about Grandpa, and I don't want to offend anyone, but Grandpa was an alcoholic, and the thing that I remember the most is when his life changed.
Yeah.
And that was when he found the Lord.
Yeah.
And it was such a drastic change in his life that I said to Grandma, what has happened with Grandpa? I mean, I was just... Yeah. Because it was it was a sweet change. It wasn't a bad thing. Right. I mean, it was just such a sweet change. And she sat me down and she talked to me about what they had found. And I remember saying to her, well, whatever it is that you guys have found, I want some of it, because it was such a it was just such a sweet change. And she says, well, honey, I want you to go with us sometime. And so it wasn't long that they encouraged me to go with them to Olive Branch Church. Okay. And that's when I met Lowell and June. And you talk about, meeting people and how things just evolve. I mean... So that was a really neat time in my life, because,
that change was something you recognize, remember, and see. And
they were very...
to that for you. And
they were very instrumental in that change in my life as well. So,
I don't know where that fits in on the spectrum of your life, but we got to high school a little bit. We were talking about high school. Which is when you met my dad. So you met my dad when you were 17? 16?
I was 16. And it was in the summer, between my sophomore and junior year.
Okay. And was it the Swihart? Was it one of the Swihart boys that introduced you guys too? So that was like...
Stuart had a part to play in that.
Yeah, it came all together. And then Dad was a year older than you, so he was... Well, I don't know how old... He was a year older than you. But, and you and him, he was 19, you were 18 when you got married. Was it right after high school?
Yeah, right after I graduated. He had went to Purdue for a year.
Okay. And so you guys had... Okay, so he had gone to Purdue for a year. And then Grandma and I were talking about this too and trying to figure out exactly those time frames. And I think I did the math right, but do you remember how old you were when you had me?
I was 27.
27. So you guys waited a good while, about eight years then?
Close to 8 years.
Before
9 years, somewhere around in there.
Yeah. And some of that was Dad was going to school, and you helped put Dad through school. And he went to Purdue, and then he also went to seminary, right? And
Bible
college, and then seminary or whatever, however that worked. So I know you helped throughout that process. So then you were pregnant and you had me, which we're just kind of fast forward through some of that, and that leads to my birth and a big part of your life, especially at the time, which was when you were diagnosed with cancer. Would you mind telling us some of those details, or kind of going into that and that experience for you and finding that out and what that? It's a crazy period of time. I can't imagine going through all those things, being pregnant, just having a baby, and having all this health problems and all these issues. So,
yeah, that was. If I can do it without crying, because it's still very tender for me.
Well, let's start here. Let's start with when you first found out you were pregnant.
Okay. That was also as bitter. I don't want that to sound bad. Let me say it, bittersweet.
Yeah.
Because your dad he was in his senior year of college.
Yeah.
And the timing was just so, and I kept thinking.
Well, that's what Grandma said.
And I kept thinking, why? Why now? I mean, because I really wanted to get him through school. That was my goal. I was very goal-oriented.
Weird. I wonder where I got that from.
Yeah, I wonder.
Huh.
But I was just so goal-oriented. And my whole focus was to get your dad through school. I just wanted him to graduate and, and be done with school and be on his way before, we thought about having a family. And if I can say this, God had a different plan.
Yeah.
And looking back at it, it was the best plan.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know I was going to get sick.
Right.
And I didn't know I was going to have all the problems I was going to have.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't have had you, which was the very best thing that probably ever happened to me. And I'm not saying that because you're my son. I mean that with all my heart. But at that time, I remember thinking, I'm surely not pregnant. There's just no way I could be how could I be pregnant? And yet, knowing deep in my soul, I could be pregnant.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I went to the doctor. I just didn't feel well. I had these constant headaches, and I just kept thinking, what in the world is going on? And yes, I had missed, my monthly cycle, and I never did.
Yeah.
So I knew, I thought
something was up.
Yeah, I thought, oh, this just can't be. There's just surely no way this could be. And I didn't even want to tell your dad. I know that sounds awful, but I just thought, this just can't be. I mean, so I went to the doctor, and he said to me, well, is there any way that you could be pregnant? And I said, well, I suppose.
There's a way.
I suppose, but... And so he, of course, did the test, and sure enough, I was. And I remember going, and it was early on. I found out I was probably 3 months, which was early back then.
Yeah.
Now they find out the first month they know. But back then that was really early.
Yeah.
And I remember going to the school to tell my mom. And I remember telling her, and she said, what are you doing here? And I said, well, I got something I need to tell you. And she said, what is it? And she says, are you sick? And I said, no. I said, I went to the doctor today, and I said, I'm pregnant. And I busted out bawling because I'm a crier. I'm a crier.
Huh, I wonder where I get that from.
I don't know. And so anyway, she says, well, Diane, there's nothing wrong with that. And she was excited. And, and I said, but Mom, the timing is all off. I said, and she said, well, sometimes we're not in control of that timing. Right. I can remember her saying that to me. And I thought, well, I definitely am not in control of this. That is for sure. So, and I remember thinking, you know, there was a couple in our church that at that time wanted a baby so bad, and I felt really guilty because they couldn't have a child.
Right.
And I thought, this is terrible. I mean, I'm feeling, you know, like the timing is wrong, and yet there's this couple that wants a baby so bad and they can't have one. And so then I tried to put things in perspective and tried to look at it, you know, that this is a life and it's your child. Yeah. And so once I did that, you know, it helped, and I embraced it, and things were good. But I really had to check myself because I was wrong in my thinking. Sure. But that's where, when you have goals are a good thing, but they can also be a bad thing too. Right. So you kind of have
other things get in the way.
Right. Right. So, but anyway.
So then came me, December 4th, 1987.
Yep.
At like, what was it? Around 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. or something?
I don't know. You were born at 5 something in the morning, and I labored for 30 and a half hours.
30 and a half hours. Ugh. Which nowadays is unheard of. But,
right. And I ended up having a C-section.
Yeah.
And let me back up a little bit, because the whole time that I was pregnant with you, I found this lump in my breast, and and I went to the doctor with it, and I said, I don't know what this is, but this is not normal. Mm-hmm. And he said, well, let's check it. Actually, that happened before I got pregnant. I need to tell that, because that was found before I got pregnant, and we had it checked out.
At the time, it was nothing?
At the time, they told me it was nothing. Mm-hmm. Well, then I got pregnant, and then that's when things started changing. Yeah. And it was probably, I was 4 months into the pregnancy. Okay. And I noticed that it was changing. Yeah. And so when I went in for because you go monthly there for a while, and I told the doctor, I said, this thing that we checked is changing. And he said, yeah, I see that. He says, let's just watch it. And he said, and then he says, if it gets any bigger, he said, we'll decide what to do then. And I said, okay. So the next month rolled around, and it started to grow even more. So by that time, it was like 6 months had passed, and he said, I think we need to do a biopsy on this. So I was 6 months pregnant, and he sent me to the cystologist in Indianapolis. And I was scared to death. Yeah. I can't explain. You
said how many months pregnant?
6 months.
6 months.
And I was mortified. And by that time, I didn't tell anybody I was pregnant until I was about 6 months along. And I knew, you really couldn't tell until about then either, to be honest. I was a walker, and I really, really watched what I ate, and I really took really good care of myself during that time. And I really didn't look like I was pregnant until about then, honestly. And so anyway, to make a long story short with that, this really was when I started showing, and really this started really changing. Yeah. And so anyhow, I went, and they did I went to the cystologist, and he did a biopsy, and he took 20 samples. And I will never forget it as long as I live. He took 20 samples of it. And he said, "Now I want you to come back in an hour and I will have the results." Well, that hour seemed like an eternity. I have never been so scared in all my life.
Yeah. Nothing worse than waiting.
So I went back in an hour, and he told me that it was nothing but a lactating cyst. And he says, and it's been triggered by the pregnancy. Yeah. And so I said, well, what do we do? I mean, because it was continuing to grow. And he said, well, once you have the baby, he said, we'll be able to remove it easily. He said, I don't think this thing will continue to get any bigger. Yeah. But he was so wrong, because it did continue to get bigger. But I still trusted in what he said. Mm-hmm. And so after I had you, after that horrific labor experience, and then going through the C-section and having you, and then had this rather large...
Yeah, your breast, you said, was the size of a basketball? Is that what you said?
That's what my medical report said.
So it had swelled to the size of a basketball.
Mm-hmm. So, after that, he told me I needed to wait 3 months after you were born to have it removed. Well, the 3 months, I was miserable. And
I know, like, after I wasn't, but did you just use your other breast for breastfeeding?
Or
did you not?
No, I wasn't able to breastfeed.
Okay.
They gave me a shot to dry up the milk
to help
glands.
with that. So
they thought that would help, but it didn't.
Right.
This continued to get bigger. Mm-hmm. So I called him. I called the cystologist, and I told him, I said, there's a problem here. I said, this is not doing what you said it would do.
Yeah.
And I said, I am miserable. I don't know what I should do now. And he said, well, I just think you need to see a surgeon and let the surgeon make a decision on what needs to be done. I said, well, who do I see? Because I don't want just anybody cutting on me. And so he gave me the name of 3 doctors.
Yeah.
And I said to him, well, if this was your wife, who would you pick? I mean, I need to know the best possible person here.
Yeah.
So he told me the top 2.
Yeah.
Well, I called the first one, and he wasn't available till I think it was like 6 weeks
later on
from that point, and I couldn't wait 6 weeks.
Right.
So the next one I called, he could see me. I think it was that Friday.
Sure.
So I got into him.
Yeah.
And when I saw him, he was extremely upset. And he said, why have you let this go?
Yeah.
And I mean, it like sucked the wind out of me, because I thought, I haven't let this go. I have been in touch with numerous doctors.
And what was this guy's name?
Dr. Bunting.
Okay, this wasn't who I was thinking. Who was the doctor that I'm thinking of? You were close with.
Probably my oncologist, who was Fred Oliver Butler.
Okay.
But anyway, so he I mean, I just was appalled. He had no bedside manner at all, but everybody told me he was an excellent surgeon and that I was in good hands. So, but I knew, once I saw him, I just had this gut feeling. I just knew that it wasn't what they thought it was.
Yeah.
No one had ever mentioned the C word. I don't even like to say the word, but no one had ever even mentioned the C word to me. But I just knew. Just knew. And he said to me, I want you in here Monday morning. Now, this was a Friday. And he said, I want you in here Monday morning. And he told the nurse, he said, I want to move my appointments back, and if I have anything scheduled Monday morning, I want it changed. So He says,
you knew that it was serious, but about that point in time.
He says, I want her first thing on the docket Monday morning. So Monday morning I was in for surgery. And when I got in there, I had that horrible waiting period that weekend. Even though it was just a weekend, it was awful.
Yeah.
So anyway, Monday morning when I went in, I said to him, is there a possibility I'm going to lose my breast? I don't know what I was thinking because my breast was enormous.
Yeah.
I knew.
But you just knew something was up.
And he says, there's no breast tissue here. This is all engulfed in tumor. Well, it was like somebody took a cold glass of water and threw it in my face.
Right. Especially when you talked about the bedside manner, especially when you're in a vulnerable place in life in general, and you just had a baby, and I'm sure hormones were out of whack anyway.
I was
on top of the fact that you have this medical issue that you're dealing with.
Yeah, I was a mess. So anyway, to make a long story short with all of that, I mean, I didn't even know what to say. It was like somebody had just drained the life right out of me. And like you said, vulnerable, I felt like I can't even tell you what I felt like.
Well, there's not much time to even process at that point in time. It's like just kind of hits you, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, I had a lot to take care of in a short amount of time. I had you. I had to find, I knew my mom would step up to the plate because I just knew she would.
Yeah.
And yet all of that was a lot. I mean, it just was a lot. Because I thought, what am I going to do? Because you were my top priority. That's all I could think about was you. I'm sorry. I know that your dad was there, but you were my top priority. That's all I could think about. And I thought, what if this does turn out to be cancer? What if, I only have so long to live? What if? All the what ifs that
your head's just reeling with all those different scenarios, I'm sure.
And so anyway, but that was very, very difficult time.
Yeah. So I know Grandma had said he came in and pretty much just said, she had mentioned the same thing, no bedside manner, and just pretty much, well, it's cancer.
Well, and he was mad.
Yeah.
Because
he felt like it was preventable. Is that kind of why?
I think so.
That you could have...
I think he felt like that it could have possibly been taken care of.
Yeah.
But nobody did.
Right.
And but who knows?
Yeah.
I mean, who knows?
No fault to you or anybody. I mean, it's at that point in time. But okay, so you had found out. I'm sure getting that news was probably shocking already.
Well, here's the thing. When I came out, they wouldn't tell me.
Okay.
They said, we're really not sure. They said they had 3 pathologists look at it in surgery. We're sending it away to the National Cancer Network in Texas.
Okay.
They said it could take anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks to find out for sure. And they wouldn't come right out and tell me. Now, they told Mom and everybody else that, and I think your dad was in on that too.
Okay.
That they thought that they were pretty sure that it was. But they weren't sure because looking at it under the microscope, it was inconclusive. They had never seen anything like that before.
Yeah.
Well,
do you know what it was specifically what it was called, or what years?
It was called cystosarcoma phalloides.
I'm gonna try to write. No, I'm just gonna listen to this later and try to write it down then. But
anyway,
one more time. It was called
cystosarcoma phalloides.
Okay.
And he explained it to me this way. He said there were 3 types of tissue going on in there. And I think that's why it was so confusing for them. He said there was cystic tissue, there was fibrocystic tissue, and he said, and back behind all of that laid the cancer. And he said, so to come right out and say that the whole tumor was cancer, I can't say that.
Yeah.
And so I had all kinds of questions. I asked him what stage it was. He said, I can say it was a 0 to 3 or a 0 to 1 stage. I said 0 to 1. I said, what
does that mean?
Yeah, what does that mean? And he says, well, basically what that means is it was in one located area of your body.
Yeah.
And I said, well, is that good? I mean, what? And he said, yes, that is good. But he said the bad part is that type of cancer normally, he says, if you want to call it normal, is attaches to a vital organ.
Yeah.
He said, so we can't really take any chances with this. He said, but he goes, I want you to see an oncologist. He said, for this to be completely conclusive as to what I'm talking about. Because he said, I've really never dealt with this before. So then that's when he hooked me up with Fred Oliver. Fred was a great guy. He was young.
Little better bedside manner?
Yeah. And when I first saw Fred, I thought, do I need to change your diaper or what? Because he was so young. I mean, I really think Fred was probably maybe in his 30s. I don't know for sure, but probably close to in his 30s. And that kind of concerned me.
Yeah.
But then I thought, well,
clearly a smart guy.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because I'm still here
Such
today.
A specialist.
Right. Yeah. And then after talking to his nurses, I had a nurse. I can't remember her name. I can't believe I can't remember her name. But she was very, very good to me. But she told me, she said, he will take you to the point of death to save your life. And I truly believe that's what he did with me.
Yeah.
Because there were days I thought to die would be easier.
Yeah. Now, I know that at some point in time they gave you, or there was a percentage at one point in time, and I'm sure that's not hard to, or easy to talk about, but what, do you remember, or are you willing to do you remember what they had said, like as far as like survival rating or?
I'm pretty sure they gave me a 40%.
40%, okay.
But it's like, I think her name was Dixie. Dixie told me, she said, those are just percentages.
Yeah.
When you've got Fred on your side,
yeah,
she said, you just store those away. That's just a percentage.
Yeah.
Is what she told me.
And Fred, he put you on both chemo and radiation. So you had like direct radiation to your breast or that area because you had a mastectomy, correct?
It wasn't what they call a full mastectomy. Now I think they've got different terms for it, but mine was just, it wasn't a radical, I'll put it that way. Mine was just what they call a simple. They didn't have to take lymph nodes.
Okay.
So mine was just what they call a simple. And
so it was post that. Now, did they allow, obviously when you remove something, you have to stitch it back up and it has to heal. Now, did they allow that to heal at all before they started those treatments? No, it went right away.
Fred wanted me there the next week.
Okay.
And I had to have some scans because they wanted to make sure it hadn't spread anywhere else because it was so large.
Yeah.
But I went down for the scans, and I had a bone scan, a CAT scan, some other kind of something. I don't even remember what it was now. But, and they all came back clear. But, as Fred said, it takes over 10,000 cancer cells to coagulate together to even show up on any of these scans.
So it's not that you couldn't have it, it's just that it may not be showing up yet.
Right. So he said, to say that this is really gone.
It's hard to say.
It's hard to say.
So then that was at that point in time that you were then.
And he said, and he told me, he says, I'm gonna give you 2 of the worst drugs on the market.
Yeah.
He said, to try to save your life.
How long did you take those? How long were you on that?
He set me up for 6 treatments, but he only gave me 5.
Okay.
because he said, I feel like the doses I have given you are enough.
Okay. And how are those every week? Is that every 2 weeks? Or
He set me up for every 3 weeks to
Okay.
get a treatment every 3 weeks. But my body got to a point where it would not.
So that's almost a year that you went through all of that.
Mm-hmm. And my body wouldn't jump back. It got to where my cells wouldn't jump back fast enough for 3 weeks. So there would be some times when I wouldn't be able to get a treatment, and they'd have to wait a week.
Gotcha.
So, and I think that's why he cut it back to just 5. But
So you now are how many years? I know we had talked about this because I was trying to figure it out.
30.
You're officially 30 years. This was your 30th year that you've been cancer-free. Hey, high five on that. Love you, Mama.
I love you too.
Glad you're here.
I am too. Then I had though 31 radiation treatments as a follow-up.
Okay. So and were those the same amount of times, or was that more frequent?
No, I had that every day.
Every day. So you had another month on top of that. So it was a full year, basically, of your treatment.
Recovering.
And then, obviously, a lot of time of recovery after that. What were some of the symptoms you experienced just from the chemo and from the radiation?
Chemo is awful. I'm not gonna, but I lived to marking them off.
Yeah.
I did. I lived for marking them off.
You knew you had so many, so you're like, those were your goals, that you being a goal
And I
person.
started out with 6, okay? I had to have 6 of them. So when he got me halfway through and he said, halfway through. He says, I think what I'm going to do, Diane, is take one of those off. Yeah. I said, you're going to what?
It was like a bonus.
That scared me though.
Yeah, sure.
I said, are you sure I don't need that one? I mean, I was ridiculous.
Might as well just give it to me.
I was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
And he said, no, I don't. He says, no, I can give it to you. But I said, no, if I don't need it, I don't. I bounced back and forth. I was crazy. He says, you are a complicated girl.
Yeah.
I said, I know I am. But
thanks for that. I'm complicated too. Hey, high fives for complicated.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, so he cut that one. So then it was like, oh my gosh, I've only got 2 left. I mean, I was really excited.
Right.
It's
a huge, piece to. When you're a goal person and you're just trying to get through all that, then for sure.
I had to drink a gallon of water the day before. They made me drink a gallon of water. I tried. I just could not eat. I mean, I maybe weighed, I think my last treatment, I maybe weighed 100 pounds.
Yeah.
By the time I was done.
Appetite and stomach and all that I've always heard that.
It was awful.
And I know that, you've had doctors now that have talked about some of, potentially some of your health things and things that you've dealt with throughout, the later parts of your life have been probably side effects, basically long-term side effects to your chemo and radiation. And I know that's affected you throughout your entire life. And it's a reminder of a really difficult time, as well as a grateful, experience that you've had. So it's like a complicated, I think would be the best words to put it. Very complicated. It's confusing because it's frustrating, I'm sure, for some of those things. Do you mind sharing any of those things that you've kind of dealt with that have affected you that has been linked back, if you can think of any? Or
well, and if this isn't what you're meaning, just tell me. But every time you go to the doctor, from this point on, I mean, I was 27 years old when this happened. So every time I go to the doctor for anything, I mean, not just a cold, of course, but I mean, anything that you're not sure what it is or what's going on.
Almost like a PTSD type,
exactly
that anxiety that comes back and you remember those moments.
Yes. And it is an anxiety that you cannot just brush off. I can't just brush it off. And no one that has, I don't feel anyway, anyone that has not walked where I've walked can understand it. And it's like, what is your problem?
Yeah.
And
well, I as long as I've known you, that's always been, that your yearly mammogram and those types of things have always been just a stressful time and a very nerve-wracking time, because there is always that possibility, and it's something that always sits in the back of your head. And
to be honest with you, I don't know if I could do it again. And I say that, and yet within every human being that I know, there is such a strong will to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that when push comes to shove, it would be there again for me.
Yeah.
But it is just so...
You know how hard it was. And we were talking about this earlier. Just in general, there are so many things that we go through. I've heard some stories recently about, just people that have... I stayed with an Airbnb couple in Florida when we were looking for a house. And I was talking with her, and she was talking about the gal, the wife of the couple. And she was just talking about, those hard times in college of I didn't eat, I was working, I was doing this. I had 3 jobs, and I was going to school, and I'd go home on the weekends and work this job or work this job on the weekdays, and you're go. And I recognize some of those things too of, man, I know, even as an athlete, I mean, I guess that's my one thing. I know how hard it is, and I know what it's like to be disciplined and to go through those things. I know how, right? And I'm sure it's similar. You know how to get through that. You've experienced it. But you also know how grueling and how difficult and how shitty and how, just hard that experience is. And to wrap your mind around, from this point of going backwards almost of, how could I ever, want to go through that? Yeah, I'm sure that that's a hard thing to think about. I guess that's definitely an aspect that I wasn't really thinking about, I guess, in that question. I know there are some health things, just whether, that people have maybe thought that was potentially more health diagnoses or health things flare-up things that popped up that maybe were related to your chemo treatments or some of those different things. I didn't know if you had anything on top of your head with those, but
I was trying to think.
Yeah, I just know that we've had conversations about it throughout the years. But let's I want to talk about. So you had a mastectomy. Mm-hmm. You went through 18 years of your life with a prosthetic breast. Mm-hmm. And I know that's maybe it's not a thing you talk about, and obviously we're putting this out into the world, but that's just part of who you were. Mm-hmm. And I grew up not thinking anything about it, that was just part of who you were. That was part of your life. That was part of the woman I knew you to be. And I remember I was 18 years old. I was in the middle of winter. It was the middle of my wrestling. I was cutting weight, and I was a bear to be around. Like I can often be nowadays even. So, but no, I was a bear to be around. And I remember Grandma coming, and this was the time when you had finally decided to have the reconstructive surgery. Mm-hmm. And you were able to have that reconstructive surgery. And so now you don't have to have that, mm-hmm. that prosthetic breast. And there's some crazy, awesome, amazing technology that people are doing, and women like yourself and men and just people in general, mm-hmm. Have had the opportunity to be recipients of some of this amazing technology, from mm-hmm. the tattooing of, your nipple, mm-hmm. and to the coloring, to all these different things that are, you don't think about the impact that something like that has on your mental state, your confidence, your security, your insecurities, mm-hmm. To what all it goes into a procedure like that, or what it's like to even live like that. And that's for anybody that's got, something that mm-hmm. is missing that should be there, or they think should be there, or was it, quote, normal would be there, I feel like, obviously 18 is when I'm starting to become more of an adult. I've needed a few extra years, I think, but No, I just feel like since then, the woman that you are has changed as well. And it's little things I couldn't tell you specifically, but I don't know. I think there's a pre-Diane and a post-Diane in some ways. And I don't know, a lot of this spurred, there's a lot of things, and whether we get into any of the other stuff is neither here nor there. But what was that like? What was that experience of going through that whole process of...
Some of it has to do with when you lose a part of you. I don't care if it's a finger or a limb.
Yeah.
It's a loss.
Yeah.
And there is a grieving that has to take place. I don't care. I remember when I lost my hair going through chemo. That was a loss.
Yeah.
There is a part of grieving that has to take place. And if you don't allow that, it's going to come one way or another. I don't care. I don't care who you are. I don't care where you've come from.
Yeah.
I don't care. It's going to come.
Yeah.
And I think part of that for me is I never allowed myself to grieve.
Okay.
And I'm just being as honest as I can be.
Yeah.
And I think that was a part of it with my breast. I don't think I allowed myself to grieve. And I think there was a number of reasons why.
Yeah.
I don't want to really go into all
That's
of that.
fine.
But you think that you don't need to. You think that, I
Being
can handle
strong
this.
is what you're supposed to do.
And I think sometimes there are things that happen and come into your life or go into your life that, I tried to be strong for everybody else. My mother was devastated. And my aunt, Kathy, that I love dearly, she was devastated. There were so many people that were hurting because of me, and I couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
I could not stand to see people hurting because of me.
Well, I get that honest too, because I don't like putting people out. I don't like seeing people I don't like help. I want to be, and
I want to be the one helping.
Yeah.
I don't want to be putting, and that's one thing that I had to learn to accept.
Yeah.
I had to learn to accept help. When I was sick, I had people coming and cleaning my house. That was the hardest thing in the world. I had people coming and taking care of you.
Yeah.
That was so hard for me.
Of course.
I was the mom. I should have been taking care of my son.
Of course.
It was so hard. I can't even tell you how hard that was. There was just so many things that took place in my life at that time. It was losses.
Yeah.
I lost a part of your baby years that I would never get back.
Yeah.
Never. That was a loss.
Right.
I mean, there were so many losses.
Yeah.
That I did not allow myself to grieve.
Yeah.
And I'm just being gut level honest. But I lost a part of me.
Yeah.
I lost, and there was just so many losses. And I think what has happened is I have allowed myself to grieve, honestly. And
do you feel like once you had the reconstructive surgery, did you feel like you got a piece of yourself back?
Yes, I do. But there was a lot of healing that has taken place since probably then. I think it all started then. I just think, and I think I look back at it and I think I'm okay. It's okay, Diane. It's okay that you went through that. It's okay. Shane is okay. I see you becoming the person that you need to be, and that you're okay. You're not ruined. You have a life with Dana.
I'm just complex.
Yeah, we're just complex. But I can't tell you how hard it was for me. I mean, and it's not that I thought I could make you something, or that's not it. It's just I hurt because I felt like I hurt other people in all of that.
Yeah.
And once I saw that you were going to be okay, and honestly, because I felt so helpless in everything, because I had no control over any of that.
Yeah.
And there was nothing I could do about it.
Right.
I mean, nothing.
Yeah, it was completely out of your control.
Completely. And I am a control freak. I mean, in certain ways. I am.
I wonder where I got that from.
But and if you'll allow me to, God has a way of breaking us. I mean, he breaks down the things in our lives that, are going to hinder what he wants to do in us.
Yeah.
And dang it, it's not fun.
Yeah.
But I do feel like I am a different person, and I have healed. I have
you started to find yourself, I think. You had that freedom, something we didn't really touch on, and we're not going to have time today, obviously, but like the divorce with my dad.
Yes.
Obviously there was, there's healing that both hard, but also healing that came from that, probably around those same times, and allowing you to heal from, past hurts and past, bitterness and hostility that probably resonated there, to just bitterness about your quote lot in life, your what you were dealt and what you were served, whether you wanted to be or not, and I really have seen that. I've seen you grow. I've seen you continue to like heal, and you've been such a backbone of me. I'm gonna cry now, so it's my turn. Okay. You can't cry, I get to. But you, as I get older, it's so hard to see those things and appreciate them when you're younger. And I don't know why that is. I mean, obviously I know that is, but sometimes I wish it wasn't that case. I wish you just could understand those things, I guess, differently. But the older I get, the more I appreciate, and I know I'll have another appreciation if and when we have kids. But I know how much you did for me. I know how much you sacrificed for me, and how much time you gave of yourself selflessly to take care of me growing up. And maybe that was trying to make up for lost time in some ways, if you can look back and psychoanalyze, but you were so huge. You always have been there. Always. You've never not been there for me.
Thank you, Shane.
And I don't do the best at keeping in touch, but we have our thing, and we do it the way it works for us. And maybe it's not what neither one of us really want in the long run, but it is what it is. But I say all that because just because we're not in touch on the daily or every week or every 2 weeks sometimes, but we stay in touch, and it's not that I just value so much all that you've given me and all that you've been there. And there's never a moment in my life that I know that I can't call my mom if I need to.
Oh, thank you. I needed to hear that.
And that's just part of who you are. It's part of your caregiving nature. It's part of your loving nature. And it's part of, I've talked about giving you a hard time about the little things that are me, but that's something you've passed on to me as well.
Well, I'm sorry for all the crappy stuff, but
well, you and Dad have enough I can blame you both for enough of those things. We'll be fine. Mom, we have reached 89 minutes.
Oh, good grief.
And my cutoff is 90 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm going to wrap things up here. Is there anything that you want to say final? Again, you've got 55 seconds.
Well, I just want to say I couldn't have made it through what I went through without you, and God knows that. And that's why you came when you did. And I know that now.
Yeah.
And I think I've shared that with you before.
Yeah.
Even though it was not the best time, it was the perfect time.
Yeah, it was what was necessary.
Right.
Well, Mother, I love you. Thank you so much for sharing and bearing your soul with us, telling your hard story. For all of you out there, if you're going through any experiences like this, or you know people that are, send them a little note, give them a call, text message, whatever it is. Let them know you love them. Love you guys. Thanks so much for listening. Check out CrazyFaceUno.com. Love ya. Peace.